If we reflect for a moment about ecology, because the whole idea of sustainability comes from the science of ecology, which is now fairly established, but it's important to remind ourselves what is the key insight, and that is that all life forms are interdependent and they evolve together, and they're sustained in a state of dynamic mutuality. And I deliberately avoid the word equilibrium. But there's certainly a mutuality and a mutual dependence, interdependence within a larger system. Within such systems, there are certain proximity factors at work, and I shall argue that when you ask yourself who sustains whom, we talk about sustainable, who's actually sustaining whom, and of course what we really mean is who's sustaining us human beings, yeah? And if you ask that question, the most proximate part of nature for us is other human beings. So I would like to invite you to look at human society as part of our environment that sustains us, and not draw such a sharp distinction. On the other hand, if you compare that insight with the idea of laissez-faire or neoliberal capitalism, you find that the principle there is often a sort of a naive Darwinism. The idea that natural and interactions in nature and also in economic life, in social life, are based on competition between rational individuals who seek to maximize their own profit and thereby their survival. And I see this as a narrative that is designed to legitimize a violent and unsustainable form of economics. And it's not true Darwinism, because in fact neither nature nor society operates like that at all. If you look at the human part of nature, which I will do first, I think the most interesting bit of social theory, one of the classics, is Norbert Elias' work on the process of civilization. Well known to social scientists, but not so well known outside the social sciences. That's why I mention it here. And he describes the typical case, or the basic pattern of human civilization. And his theory says that there's a historical process whereby over time, human societies became more complex, more interdependent, ever greater division of labor, and ever widening webs of interdependence. So, across the span of human history, the globalization is really just an end state in a long process that is fairly clear, ever widening webs of interdependence. So, if we are social and if we sustain one another first and foremost, the way we sustain each other has become more and more complex and all-encompassing. Interesting also, if you look at Adam Smith, one of the fathers of modern economics, his first book is about moral economy and how economy rests really on a moral framework. And he is very critical, and he describes the atypical case of mercantilism, which is an unsustainable pattern, which he considers uncivilized and ultimately irrational, an irrational form of economic behavior, which he calls beggaring thy neighbor. Now, these kinds of patterns abound today. One example, you might have heard in the news, people criticizing Angela Merkel's politics, which has led to this huge trade surplus in Germany. Of course, production costs are reduced by keeping wages very low, and that's depressing consumer demand in Germany. It's not good for other EU countries. But at the same time, I'd also like to say that this wouldn't be possible if there weren't also benefits. So you never have for very long a pattern where one party really exploits the other. You can't maintain that sort of pattern for very long. So if there wasn't also mutuality, this wouldn't even be possible in the first place. The same would apply to another case that's frequently in the news, the relationship between the US and China. You see there some overview. You know, the US has 51 billion of foreign reserves, China 3,240 or 3 trillion. You see the export ratios, the current account balance, which is positive in China and negative in the US. At the same time, the reality is that even in these cases of degraded nature, there are always also mutual benefits. Otherwise, it wouldn't be happening at all. Again, of course, there's the Chinese would say that they have a right also to catch up. So I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone. I'm just saying that this kind of behavior is not uncommon.
What is 51? Sorry, 51.
A billion of foreign currency reserves. Yeah. So, all right. And another example, which really shows how flawed this strategy is in the end. Apart from being, not sustainable in the long run, it's also fundamentally irrational. If you look, for example, at corporate tax rates and the sort of race to lower corporate tax rates, and also the contribution of employers to social benefits, pensions, health benefits, and so on, in the attempt to maximize foreign direct investment. So you have a sort of a race to the bottom if you apply this kind of strategy instead of cooperating and setting a reasonable rate. Okay. So if cooperation is so characteristic of human society, if you're so very social beings, why is it that we behave in this way at all? Why does this kind of competition happen? I would say it has a part, competition has a part in nature, it has a part in society, but we do have a choice between what you might call runaway destructive competition or economic violence and civilized or ecological competition within a cooperative framework. In effect, there's always an element of cooperation. You cannot compete without cooperating. You cannot play a game without having some kind of game rules. Even if you cheat, there's still certain rules you depend on. So cooperation is absolutely paradigmatic of human interaction. The competition has a part in it, but when it's too extreme, it's pathological. And if you look at the history of the human species and our success as a species, it's because we are so incredibly social and we have an unprecedented capacity to cooperate through our use of language and tools. So human society is an evolving rules-based social system, and it resembles, in many ways, natural ecosystems. In part, it is just another ecosystem. That's what I'm trying to argue. So within such ecosystems, cooperation is the norm, but competition also occurs and is okay to an extent. Now, if you can't go back to the idea of Norbert Elias of these ever-widening webs of interdependence, what has happened really then, it shouldn't surprise us, because those webs have extended massively in a very short time. The global economy just hasn't reached that point of ecological competition or civilized competition. Rather, we have some rogue predators in unregulated global markets that cause ripple-down effects to the international, intra-community, and even back to the family level, and destroying those levels of economy that are already ecological in their character. Okay, but it shouldn't really surprise us. If you look, This is a sort of an overview of what's happening. And the green line is the 50 poorest percent of humanity. The blue line is the 8 richest people on the planet. And they have now equal wealth. Those 8, on the top of this is Bill Gates, but I've included on place 9 Charles and David Koch, the Koch brothers, whose joint wealth is actually greater than that of Bill Gates. So these gentlemen here own half of the wealth on the planet. That's strange, to say the least. If you now look at the nature component, and I have to hurry because I'm being told I'm running out of time. You've all heard about Paul Crusen's idea of the Anthropocene, and our behavior now is, we've been able to rely, when it comes to the greater nature on which we depend, in order to sustain ourselves, we've been overstretching it. We've been able to rely on that until now, and it seemed like an endless source of resources, but we've now reached the limits. The problems began with the Neolithic Revolution, some people say, the Anthropocene, sedentary agriculture, others say it was the Industrial Revolutions, others again that it was a post-war period of global consumer society. They're all correct, it's just different stages, and the real acceleration was post-World War II. Is it a social crisis? Is it a natural crisis? To answer that question, you'd have to say, are there any precedents in nature? And there are. Well, meet cyanobacteria. About 3.2 million years ago, this species evolved, and they produced a toxin, oxygen, which was lethal to anaerobic species. It took 200 million years for these bacteria to fill up all the natural oxygen sinks, namely organic matter and iron. It's taken us 200 years, not 200 million, to fill up all the carbon dioxide stores with our activities, which began with the discovery of fire and the use of fire to shape landscapes, and this ended up in our current sort of fossil fuel age. The consequence in 40 years, we've lost about half of the population of wild species. I work for IBBES as a scoping expert on their deliverable 3B, which is human use of wild species. And after 2000, which is off this graph, the drop is really dramatic, much more dramatic again. So we really have a problem. What do we do? I think we need to act with courage rather than succumbing to fear. And we must remind ourselves, while this is an unprecedented level and speed of destruction that we are causing here in the Anthropocene, no other species and no previous generation of humans has ever been so informed as we are of the effect that we have on sustainability of global ecosystems, even though none also have done as much damage. So we know what's happening, we are well informed. So there's a kind of a psychological fork in the road. Do we want mutual efforts towards transformation to sustainability, or mutual assured destruction, which of course is a term from the Cold War age, referring to nuclear weapons, but we must understand our technology has that general character, not just nuclear weapons, it's all highly lethal if you take an evolutionary time scale to look at the effect. Everything we do is that lethal. Yeah. So why do we need to do this? Well, our use of renewable resources exceeds the renewal rate. We're destroying the biosphere also by pollution, not just by direct usage, but by pollution and by mechanical means, such as urban sprawl. There's a peak in non-renewable resources, not just oil, but also things like lithium, which you need for the solar energy industry. We have a growing population and growing per capita consumption. We all hear about climate change, but there are other aspects. These colored areas are areas in the world where soil is under threat. Soil loss is a massive problem. This is water insecurity around the world. Again, you see a large part of the world is affected. And those two combined, food security issues. Again, and this map is not just the present, and it doesn't yet account for the future crisis under climate change. We're dealing, how do we do it? We have to do this immense complexity at the material level because of the interconnected nature of the material challenges. I'm just working on a paper by Itsu on the SDG interactions and how you can't just fix, say, renewable energy with biofuels at the same time you're causing deforestation and other problems, yeah? And food security issues. So you can't treat one bit at a time, you have to look at it systemically. We have social complexity in a globalized world, and in fact those two forms of complexity are cross-linked as well because of the transnational nature of contemporary social relations. What you do in Africa affects people in Europe and so on. It has to be a whole world, whole system approach. What is required is human behavior change, a more social cooperation, reduced consumption clearly, and on the basis of security that minimum needs are met. And my belief is that when people's basic needs are met and they feel secure, they don't need to overconsume and stockpile and hoard and accumulate huge riches. That's just the product of fear. But we can have growth in non-material consumption of virtual goods. Right? And in most societies, people don't pursue riches, but their interest is really in mutual approval. That's what happiness is made of. We need changes in the mode of production, avoid non-renewables altogether, and limit our use of renewables. Reuse, repair, upgrade, recycle, all those kinds of principles. Superior quality and durability and short supply chains, all these are key elements, and for that you need to look at the whole product life cycle. We need innovation. Desert tech is a good example, but we should, and if you look at Kondratyev's idea of Kondratyv waves, are we nearing a sixth wave of innovation? The renewable, sustainable economy, driven by technical innovation. Well, I have certain doubts that the sixth wave is purely technological. We should be aware of the hubris of technological development. There's a picture from the 50s that nicely displays the sort of dream of a technotopia. And we mustn't forget that we already have many sustainable economies on the planet, and we should protect those sustainable economies that we already have. And also, for 99% of human history, our economies were sustainable. Let's not forget that. It's not rocket science. A little animation I wanted to show you, some of you will have seen it. This is about different world economies. The two red ones are China and India, and the line there, that's the sustainability line. Yeah? So you can see some of them crossing. But you see also a lot of societies are still under that line in the sustainable range. So it's not such a miracle to make economies sustainable. In fact, we have many sustainable economies. Many people who are not living beyond don't have an ecological footprint that is too great. Fisheries. I really like Schumacher's 1973 book, Small is Beautiful. That's that one thing you should reread again. Here's fisheries. You could do the same argument about farming and how a smaller scale and large scale fisheries differently operate. And you can see we shouldn't need to look towards high-tech solutions for some of these problems, but we need also to look at what we already managed to develop over millions of years. And these examples of sustainable economies abound. This is Bali, for example, rice agriculture that's been going for thousands of years. So that's my sort of idea of what it might look like. Sure, there'll be technology in the mix, but we must also look at more other ways, alternative ways. Permaculture is a good idea. They're a good example of that kind of combination solution. That's it.